Eric. Good, Erica. How are you?
Great, great. Looking forward to this.
All right, I'm getting the cue to get this thing going. So hello, everybody. I'm Jen Goldsberry with BioOhio. Great to see so many of you, and I'm sure we'll get more people to jump on here as we get rolling. Very excited to be doing this event in partnership with Greater Cleveland Partnership and longtime BioOhio and bioscience friend across the state, Baiju Shah. Thank you so much for being here. Just quick snapshot on BioOhio. The big news in our world is the announcement of our new President and CEO, Eddie Pauline, who will be joining BioOhio August 9th. So we will continue to be a wonderful resource for you. In our 34th year, that is not going away. We're here to help you grow and grow our membership. So if you're not yet a member and you'd like to have that discussion, I am happy to do that anytime. There's a world of resources and benefits available to you. Public policy will continue to be important, of course, and economic development as we grow the state in the bioscience industry. So we got a lot of people involved in that, and happy to do it. Happy that Mike Triplett is here today moderating the session. He is again a longtime friend of the bioscience industry too, and one of our board members. So I think that's all I have. I want to get the conversation rolling and be ready to ask questions and get involved in today's session. We want it to be interactive and fun for you and very informative. So Baiju and Mike, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Jennifer. Baiju, thank you. I know you're very busy these days, so I'm going to get right to the point. The most important question: what is the consensus on the new name of the team currently known as the Indians?
We are all for the Guardians, right? It's great to have a name that is committed to Cleveland, and it was great in particular to see Paul's statement in terms of both the importance of not only the Guardians and the symbolism of the Guardians, but really sort of his broader comment about the commitment of the team to Cleveland and sort of continuing the baseball tradition here. And I'll just say to this audience, stay tuned, more to come.
I couldn't agree more. It was the story behind it. It was a masterful move from my perspective. I was actually ironically in Cincinnati at the Reds game last Friday, and it was such a topic of conversation down there. And as people started to do the research, as the messaging, the story behind it came out, overwhelmingly very cool. So just well done by the Cleveland community there.
Yeah, no, they did a masterful job. And then to have Tom Hanks be the narrator for the video. I mean, anytime you've got Tom Hanks on your side, it's going to help sway opinion. But so far up here, it seems like they've done a marvelous job, and they've kind of rekindled the love of the franchise among the broader public.
Agree. So that was a loaded question. I appreciate you taking that. You could have deferred on that one, but being a baseball fan, I'm a big fan of that change. So, like every good conversation of this nature and all the podcasts I listen to, I want to start with your bio and your background. So can you paint the picture of Baiju Shah's background and upbringing for us?
Well, as a Cleveland Indian myself, I guess, born and raised here, we can start all the way back there. But my background in kind of just short form, Cleveland original, went off to the East Coast for some of my early education, early career work, but always had this desire to come back. Was not a bio guy at all in my early career and work. So history major, law school by training, but had this desire to come back to Cleveland because wanted to be involved in some way in what was at that time being called Cleveland's comeback. So this is the 1990s. We had just actually built, the new stadium where is now the old stadium where our baseball team plays. There was a lot of excitement about, other developments that were going on and kind of that sense of pride. And I wanted to be a part of it. So that's kind of what brought me boomeranging back to Cleveland in 1998. At the time with a consulting firm, McKinsey & Company. And I was fortunate to be a part of McKinsey, not only for the training and exposure that gave me to a broader set of businesses, the private sector, but also because the firm has had a long tradition of being involved in civic matters here in Cleveland. That was part of what drew me back to work with them. Through that process of being back with the firm, I spent most of my time at McKinsey working on new strategy, growing new businesses for large diversified industrial and financial services firms, thinking about innovation and capitalizing on particular kind of languishing IP portfolios at some of these companies, but also did a lot of civic work, which is, again, part of what I wanted to come back to Cleveland for, part of what drew me to that particular firm. And as a part of that civic work, which we did on a pro bono basis, in about 2000, we started an effort with Case Western Reserve, Cleveland Clinic, and University Hospitals here to look at their strengths as an organizations, their intellectual and talent strengths, as well as just their presence as a part of our local economy, and started to ask the question, what more could we do? As we took a look forward to the 21st century, and like many regions across Ohio, has had to start to reimagine what our economic base was going to look like as globalization was changing kind of the local jobs landscape, and technology was changing, careers and all those things. And that led to the creation of BioEnterprise, an organization that is, a partner of BioOhio, which I had the privilege of leaving McKinsey to help launch and run for a decade. And that's how I became a bio guy. Again, no healthcare background before that, but through that experience, got to know a lot of great entrepreneurs in town, got mentored by some really wonderful entrepreneurs like Bill Sanford and Mal Mixon. Bill has a long history with BioOhio as well, having served as kind of one of the catalysts for the organization back in the 1990s, and learned to love the sector. Really learned to love healthcare. For 20 years was kind of a healthcare guy with kind of a civic twist to my involvement in healthcare, but spent time after BioEnterprise launching a biotech initiative that was focused on translating early stage drug discoveries from institutions around the country into the beginnings of drug products, and starting to move them through the early process towards INDs, and getting them, financed by larger institutional and pharmaceutical investors and all that good stuff. But missed the civic side, and that's what kind of led me to leave Biomotive a couple of years ago, jump back into the civic world to see what I could do to catalyze more civic support for innovation initiatives. And one thing led to another thing, led to another thing. And here I find myself today as the head of the Greater Cleveland Partnership.
Phenomenal opportunity. It's a great selection. You're a natural for that role. And you and I have so many overlapping interests and different backgrounds, but overlapping synergies that most people, I think, find to be disparate in nature. And we'll come back to some of those here in a minute. But one thing I want to explore just briefly is what lit the fire in you to have that civic passion?
There's fire in the water in these parts of Cleveland, as you well know. And so it just, it burns it. Once you've drank it, it just burns inside of you, that passion for our region, that the opportunity to help it realize its full potential. I feel very fortunate to have grown up in Cleveland, to have been well supported throughout my career as well as my youth in this town, and always felt that the people in this community deserved better than what the country thought of them and thought of us, I should say. And that I had the opportunity to contribute in some ways to helping this region realize its full potential. It's kind of just that hometown thing. That's what got me really interested in the coming back. And I don't know why it exists in me, but it's just a part of me. It's part of who I am. And it's when I'm at my happiest, I think, is when I'm doing something that in some way contributes back to our community.
I greatly respect that. And we have that's a mutual point of connection for us, as you know.
Also, and it's also why I love healthcare. Again, as I was not a as I said, I was not someone who knew much about healthcare until jumping into bioenterprise. And I jumped in not because of the science and the technology and the impact it has on patients and humanity, but I jumped in because it was a civic venture. But through that, I really got exposed to what the power of health innovation could do for not just our region, of course, but for people around the world. And that's what inspired me to, and continues to inspire me to be involved in the healthcare sector, even though I've got now probably a 90% focus on civic things and only kind of 10% of my time still being involved in the healthcare space.
Well, you're in a great place to leverage some of the elite institutions in the world, particularly with the clinic and UH and CASE. So nobody better to tie strategy to that healthcare enterprise for the civic good and humanity's good. So let me ask you about, I think of you as a strategist, innovator, and entrepreneur. And again, people don't, that's not a combination you typically associate with people, but you basically describe those elements in your background leading up to this. On the strategy piece,
yeah,
do you think strategy is something that is intuitive to people, or do you think it is something that you can learn?
That's a great question. I think strategy, Mike, I would say I break that apart a bit. So I think strategy, unlike being an entrepreneur, I think strategy let me say this differently. You can learn a lot in strategy. You can learn a lot about being an entrepreneur, but then there's that putting it into practice. That is something where I think you can be taught how to do that better as a strategist, but the risk taking and intuition and just sort of the mindset and skills that one needs to be an entrepreneur, I don't know how well that can be taught. I think you'd be enhanced if you have it, but I think there's something intrinsic in the entrepreneurs that I've met throughout my career, that there's just something a little bit different about their willingness to, in the odds of, when you do the analytical approach to anything, when you're launching a new venture or a new civic initiative, if you were just completely rational, you would walk away. Right? We would all walk away. There's higher probability things to be pursuing that could also be very meaningful for society and have impact. But there's something else about entrepreneurs in saying, okay, even though this is a really low probability outcome, the outcome can be tremendous. And I think I can overcome all of the, clearly identifiable obstacles, as well as all the things that you can't see because they're lurking subsurface. And you just have that kind of mindset of, I'm going to go get it. Now, I don't think that can be taught. I think that is something that's wired into how people are. And it's not, I don't know where it comes from, because, I see families that you got, a real entrepreneurial risk taker, and then you got the whole rest of the family that's not at all. And they've all got sort of shared genes. And so it's like, it's not in the DNA. So I'm not exactly sure where it comes from, but it's pretty unique when you see it on people. And then that's what you can enhance, but you can't teach.
I agree. I've supported entrepreneurship education in Ohio State. I'm working back from East Liverpool, for those who don't know, which has a different type of water, probably a little bit radioactive downstream from, but working with the community there to launch an entrepreneurship academy in the public school system.
Yeah.
But you come back to all the time, you can teach certain elements, but how do you really teach a mindset or that intrinsic belief? And I'm not sure that you can. I mean, we can teach lean startup theory or whatever the latest approach to product management is, but I agree that is something that is hard to teach. So when you think about entrepreneurship, a couple of things come to my mind. I look at you, how you project yourself, your background. I don't think of you as becoming an entrepreneur. Same when I look in the mirror with me. Never grew up with that aspiration, just sort of, but there was always a gnawing feeling of,
Yeah.
I can make an impact, or I see this. When did you realize that you had that DNA, if you will?
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably didn't recognize that it was a character flaw until I had done it a few times, right? And in different ways. When I distinctly remember the conversation I was having with Bill Sanford. So let me go back to the bioenterprise day. So McKinsey, not very entrepreneurial, right? That's kind of a safe jump, if you will.
Right.
Even though within the firm, I was, trying to always do different things rather than the standard things. I didn't recognize myself as an entrepreneur because you're at McKinsey, and that's not really taking a hell of a risk, right? So Bill Sanford and I had this conversation as we were forming BioEnterprise, and Bill at the time was the chair of the BioEnterprise board. He's for those that don't know Bill, he was the founder and CEO for many years of Steris Corporation, one of our large medical device companies in the state. And when Bill and I had worked together for about a year to form BioEnterprise, the strategy, bring all the institutions together and, have a plan. And then Bill said, why don't you leave McKinsey and help me launch this thing and, see if the vision that we've got can actually take flight. And I had this long conversation with Bill, and, I was doing fine at McKinsey, and McKinsey's a very nice place to be, of course, is from a career perspective. And Bill just kind of challenged me and put it out there. And he goes, I've gotten to know you a lot over the year of working together. And I know that a year from now, you're going to kick yourself if you don't actually try to build what you've just described. You talk about it with a, kind of a passion around it. And he goes, I think you can do this. And I also know a year from now that if it doesn't work out for whatever set of reasons in the world, that you can always go back to a McKinsey-like career, right? There's no downside. There's no real downside, right? If you take a step back risk. So that's what led me to jump to BioEnterprise. And again, I don't think of that yet as the entrepreneur. That's not when I recognized as an entrepreneur, because Bill just kind of helped me reframe risk. And I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I'll jump, and it's not really a huge risk because, I was maybe naive and idealistic, but I was like, I can go back to consulting in some way if things don't work out. I did a couple more, kind of civic ventures on the side of BioEnterprise. And I think that's when I started to realize that, I love being around entrepreneurs. I love trying to start things myself. When things got to a point where things were steady state, I personally, just lose a little bit of my interest. It's not where I get my energy. I like it when it's completely chaotic. I like it when it's not clear, where all the puzzle pieces are, how we're going to bring them all together, how we're going to motivate the resource holders, to be a part of it, whether it's funders or strategic partners. That's what keeps me buzzing and thinking about how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we do it? Because as you know, and as every entrepreneur on this call knows, you just, it's not only obstacles that you hit nonstop naysayers telling you why it can't be done. And for entrepreneurs, that's motivating, right? It just sort of, every time someone tells you it can't be done, it just sort of fires you up a little bit more and says, I'm going to figure out a way around. I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen.
I agree. There are so many aspects of that we could explore, but the one that I'll try to extract is the fact that making sense, organizing chaos for some desired output, some desired objective. To me, that's where strategy and entrepreneurship come together. So that's how I can see those two converging. Because the strategists I know, the people who are just really good at it, that I've been around over the years, they do the same thing.
Yeah.
Particularly in an organization that's looking to set a new course or needs to set a new course, whether they recognize it or not. And then entrepreneurship is by default, you're just operating typically in a chaotic environment when it's very early stages, as you know.
Right.
So that's that's very very, very impactful, very relevant. And then, so for you, I mean, one of the things I want to do here is, between our experience back and forth, corporate, McKinsey, Procter and Gamble, Battelle, your current role, entrepreneurship, biomotive, Myonexus, Armatus, you name it. What do you see as the difference? I mean, one of the things I talk about, the barriers for people who are in corporate, because I had the same urges, I had the same sensation. I look back now, it makes sense. Like, I was always pushing the boundaries, and people telling you can't do that.
Right.
And you see a better way. What do you, for the people who are sitting in a corporate environment who are having those sort of thoughts and feelings, what would you say to them? Do you have any guidance for them as to what the trigger is, how they go through the evaluation process for when it's time?
Yeah, it's so drawing again a little bit on my own experience with that conversation with Bill Sanford. I think I try to sort of, when I encounter these questions from colleagues in the corporate world, I try to just reframe that risk question, right? If you've got that gnawing bug that you know that you can do it differently, you can do it better, you just have an idea that you want to pursue, but somehow you feel bound because of the career track you're on, because of the needs that you have personally or your family. I try to help people start to really think about, what's the real risk here? What's the real downside? Because I have seen too many people kind of have that midlife recognition of lack of fulfillment on a professional basis because they were too afraid at too many points along the journey to take that leap and at least try things out. It's not to say it's always going to work out, but I think if you've got that gnawing sense that you want to try it, my big encouragement to most people that are in the corporate world or wherever they might be is, take that test run early. No matter what happens, you're going to be better for having made the leap. And then the corporate world will always be open to you. Again, just as Bill had advised me, we know, especially, today, where the talent war and the talent shortage is so acute and across the board at every level of every type of organization, that corporate opportunity is always going to be waiting for you to come back to if things don't work out and you're just looking for kind of, again, financial, practical reality of needing to return to a work and steady income. Or if you find that entrepreneurship is not for you, you can always revert back. I would just, I just encourage people, leap early. And if you love it, you're going to feel better for having done it early because you're going to have a lifetime of, pursuing these types of journeys that are going to be fulfilling personally. And sometimes, when they work, will be very impactful broadly for society.
I agree. Well said. And one of the things in my mentoring and participating in entrepreneurship classes as a mentor, coach, or assistant teacher, whatever, at Ohio State or beyond, you often, one of the things that I marvel at is the entrepreneurs can be somewhat self-righteous. The flip side of this is they become self-righteous and they think there's something magical about it. And I'm not so sure. Can you talk about the strategic context or the differences and the similarities between innovating or driving a new agenda inside a corporate environment and that startup environment?
Yeah, it's very different context, as you said. So in the startup environment, when you're driving that agenda, typically you are the leader, right? Or part of the leadership team in some capacity. And there is a need for constant pivoting, right? As you manage your way through the chaos, you've got, generally speaking, limited resources, even when you're well capitalized. Well capitalized means, 18 months to 24 months of runway. So there are proof points that are required all through that journey to get to that next level of sustainability for your startup enterprise. And you're making decisions with not only, limited information, which you do in the corporate environment as well, but you're doing decision making in rapid fashion and constantly kind of validating and testing. And I think it's normal in that startup environment to have that pace of decision making and energy that you bring to that enterprise. I think of it as, you're setting that long-term vision in a startup enterprise. What the vision is. The journey to get there can go every day, can take you in slight pivots here or there, but you hold tight to that long-term vision, and eventually you start to work your way there. You get the breaks that are actually going to make it there. In the corporate context, it's very, very, my experience, is it's very different, because the corporate processes, the corporate culture does not lend itself well to that type of rapid review of strategy, rapid review of actions. There tend to be, more functions that want to be involved, committees and processes that slow things down. And if you want to be an internal corporate entrepreneur, it's not the easiest of things to do, because of the process in the system doesn't always enable you to be able to do things that may need to have 3 to 5 years of kind of gestation before you see fruition. When corporations, especially publicly traded corporations, are thinking about things in quarterly to annual goals, and sometimes having significant strategic shifts because of either organizational leadership changes, investor and stakeholder pressure around strategy changes. I mean, there's things where things go, it's not the easiest thing to do. When we were advising corporations, and this is again 20 years ago as McKinsey, but I think this is still true today from my now perspective of observing corporations from the outside. We always talked about, for these innovation units, you had to have a completely differentiated management approach. You needed to have them, isolated from the core, and that isolation would be enhanced if you had outside private capital participation, so that you didn't even, think of managing it the way you would manage your traditional business units or functions, where, every quarter you're coming around and asking for kind of the budget review update and the goals update and the types of things that just don't make a lot of sense when you're doing things that are highly innovative, whether that's investing in a portfolio of enterprises or trying to nurture a portfolio of new products and services. We just said differentiated management, ideally with an external partner that understands how to manage these types of portfolios and manage the types of development of risk, and manage it in all ways, right? Whether it's talent management and incentives, capital allocation, thinking differently about strategic partnerships and alliances. I mean, all ways that are completely different than a large corporation would think about it.
Completely agree. My first venture into venture, if you will, was a spin out of a large company here in Columbus, and they exported a number of the management systems into that early stage company, and it just did not work.
Yeah.
At all. And you see that time and time again. So let's talk about your journey through life sciences. We spent some time talking about entrepreneurship. Obviously, anybody who works for McKinsey is inherently a very strong, masterful strategist, which will serve you well in the role that you're in today, for sure. In life sciences, what do you, first of all, what was that like for anybody? I get asked all the time, whether it's a high school student, we have some questions about here today about people coming from a business background wanting to get into life sciences. What would you advise, whether they're undergraduate students, MBA students, or mid-career professionals who want to make a transition into life sciences?
Yeah. Well, it's first of all, it's a great field, right? For all the reasons we've talked about, the impact one can have on humanity through life sciences is there are very few fields in which you can wake up every day feeling that the work that you're doing can have the magnitude of life-changing impact it can have as you can in the life sciences. So I think if that motivates an individual for why they might be seeking a career in the space, that's great, because that is the true north that I think infuses all of us that have dedicated all or most of our careers to healthcare in some capacity. And you've got to keep that as kind of the true north, because the journey to bring a new product or a new service to market is very, very challenging. So the second piece of advice I would give is to appreciate one thing that I learned and love about life sciences in particular, and I think serves me well also in this new role, is the number of different disciplines that have to be in sync with one another to move a product or an innovation or service forward is probably, I don't know if there are fields as complex as life sciences, but it's very, very complex. And there has to be an appreciation for how those different disciplines contribute. And then from a business perspective, how to speak the language of each of those disciplines. And what I mean by that is knowing what motivates scientific leadership, and whether that's in your company or your partners, is understanding what they're excited about, what's going to motivate them, how to work with them. It's very different than clinical leadership, right? And understanding sort of how to speak to clinicians and understanding what motivates clinicians and what pressures they're under. Very different than regulators, and how regulators participate in this. Very different than sales and marketing. Very different than insurance companies and payers. And your job in life sciences, if you're trying to bring a product or service innovation all the way to market, is to figure out how to knit all of these pieces together throughout the process. And as the business person, translate between all of those areas, plus, the traditional business functions like finance and business development and marketing, and just understanding the language translation, which is not just words, but it's around what motivates each of these groups, and then trying to help people figure out a way to stay focused on the true north of it's about the patient. And we're trying to move forward, a product, service, or innovation to serve the patient, but understanding their pressures, being able to communicate to them in languages and around incentives that will guide their participation in that collaboration is absolutely critical. And I think that's what's the wonder about when anything actually makes it all the way to the market. It's astounding to me, given how challenging it is to get things moving forward. We work with institutions, you and I both, as do many of the folks on this Zoom. It's really challenging to work with an institution to get intellectual property out of that institution, let alone to then collaborate on its development or clinical work, and then eventually, trying to get them to be users of a new service, device, or drug. And it's amazing when all of that stuff happens in a way where things actually come to market. And of course, capital providers are a whole different discipline. One needs to understand what motivates capital providers, how to speak to them in their language, and there's many subsegments of capital providers. So that's the neat thing about life sciences, is that there's lots and lots of roles that individuals can play in terms of careers. The more that one understands that all these pieces are absolutely required, they need to be required and integrated and respected, and brought together, the more successful I think people will have a chance of being. There's obviously always high risk in the technology itself, but it's really can be an incredibly rewarding career to be a rewarding sector to be a part of.
Well said. Well said. It's an incredibly diverse, intellectually diverse field and industry to be in. And you're absolutely right. All voices need to be respected. And if one area is being disrespected or suppressed, that is a major risk for that enterprise or that effort. So I totally agree with that. Regarding the state of Ohio and the opportunity for the state, in life sciences. Do you and I both have been involved with the Innovate Ohio initiative on behalf of the current administration. What do you see from the state perspective? What do you think what are target rich environments for the state and or the local communities? And what can the people on this Zoom do to support that, if anything?
Yeah, so I would say, we are blessed with incredible resources, assets, and we've actually got relatively strong public policy support in the form of whether it's Third Frontier, Jobs Ohio, other initiatives. Where we still struggle as a state is thinking of ourselves as a state. It is, we all struggle within our own regions of trying to get our regions to stay connected to one another and really, think of the common good from collaboration and inside of regions. I think we've come a long way, facilitated by the state, by major grants like the Innovation District grants recently from Jobs Ohio that continue to fuel that sense of at least intra-regional collaboration among our largest healthcare research and clinical organizations. Where we have significant opportunities, in my opinion, one is really trying to knit things together across the state and looking for those opportunities where Ohio can be, go to market. The further away you get from the state, nobody really cares about Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati. They think about Ohio versus North Carolina, Ohio versus Texas, Ohio versus, Tennessee and other places. And we need to recognize that. And we need to, as individual leaders in our state, go to market as a state is we're ambassadors for it. And I think the state can do a lot. I think BioOhio as an organization could do a lot to help us, be that kind of singular voice of the state's bioscience assets and opportunities, and recognizing where we have maybe unique strengths. Mike, you've done a great job of leading on gene and cell therapy as one of those emerging areas. There's probably a couple of other pockets. I look at biomedical engineering and medical devices is a great area. I also look at what we've got as potential in AI in medicine broadly, right? Leveraging our great clinical systems, but bringing more of the AI lens into sort of how we think about everything from diagnosis to care to remote care. The opportunity that we also need to foster more of is really strong industry institution collaborations around these areas. So if we pick a couple of focus areas like those or others that might be present throughout the state, how do we ensure that we have more of an industry guided approach to building that not only research collaboration, but really ecosystem building. So you and I have talked about in gene and cell therapy, all the gaps that exist because of lack of suppliers, around a lack of manufacturing, lack of talent programs that are sufficient to keep up with the growing emerging segment. If we can define that from the industry perspective and then work with our state and work with our institutions to be able to provide it, I think it helps us as a state in terms of growing that segment of our healthcare sector. Similarly, in again, other pockets. That's where I see opportunity. And I see a group like BioOhio with new leadership that has just been announced, potentially being able to be that convener that helps us really forge a strategic path forward with the state that helps us grow segments of our industry.
I agree completely. I had a very productive meeting with the heads of Jobs Ohio, Department of Development, Lieutenant Governor on Monday. Follow-up meetings already scheduled, getting together with the leadership teams of the respective organizations over the next few weeks. There's definitely a receptivity to what we can bring from the BioOhio perspective at the most senior leadership levels in the state of Ohio. So I agree, there's a tremendous opportunity for BioOhio moving forward. And I look forward to partnering with you Alex Fisher, now Kenny McDonald,
Yep.
and others to move this forward on behalf of all of us and behalf of everybody in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, I think that's a big, so, comparing to 20 years ago, when I kind of first waded into the civic space, our sector was, emerging. It was not on the prime agenda of our business leadership organizations in Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati. I think that's very different now, not only, of course, with me here in Cleveland, Kenny in Columbus. I think the same is true in Cincinnati. We've got an administration that's very receptive, and we've got resources, not only in what's already been committed via Jobs Ohio and Third Frontier, but the state budget that just passed, they passed it knowing that their internal projections suggested that they probably had an additional $3 billion in revenue. No one wanted to spend that in the waning hours of the budget negotiations, which I think is wise policy. I think it's where you don't want to rush that. It presents an enormous opportunity at the moment for our sector to think about what could be those targeted uses of some of those dollars that would really catalyze our ability to both grow existing companies in Ohio, but then also attract additional companies to Ohio, because we're building that ecosystem infrastructure that's critical and in short supply around the world, not just our country.
Completely agree. So I had a conversation with Kenny McDonald this morning, conversation with here today very publicly, but more to come. I think you'll see us convene the leaders soon and try to drive some cohesion across the state of Ohio. And I'm very excited about Eddie Pauline taking over. Eddie, who's by background, he's a Northeast Ohio native, very passionate fan of the Guardians and Browns et al.
Yeah.
And is very well known here in Columbus and established in Columbus, but very talented on the economic development front. So I think it was very clear from the stakeholders a strong desire for BioOhio to re-engage on the economic development front, in addition to service the membership as well, and interest and advocate for policies that are appropriate for the industry. Eddie will be a strong partner, and I look forward to getting him together with you, Kenny, and others as we move forward here, and we can move forward productively, collectively, and create a better tomorrow for everybody. But Baiju, I just want to say thank you for your time. I know how incredibly busy you are, given the role that you're in today, and I've always valued the friendship over time. And thank you.
Well, I appreciate being here. Thanks, Jen, Drew, Scott, for having me join. And I think we're going to open it up for some questions, and I've got a little bit of time left to participate.
Yeah, fascinating discussion, you guys. Thank you so much for the content and the questions, Mike, and your guidance and what you provided, Baiju. Really fascinating. I love the conversation about the cohesion across the state. As BioOhio, as you know, is a statewide organization. This is something that we are doing every day, making the cross-regional introductions. And I know some people, sometimes they're hesitant to do that, especially entrepreneurs or leaders, and they kind of forget. You get so siloed in your industry or your company or your day-to-day, you forget to go outside your region. So talking about that is really important. And just for people on the phone, and if there's any comments anyone has there, BioOhio is that resource to make those introductions and make sure you're getting connected across the state, because that is what's going to raise us up to the next level. It's the rising tide raises all ships analogy. So we're really looking forward to that. We do have some questions. Does anybody want to unmute and ask Mike or Baiju anything? And there's a couple questions in the chat I can ask also. Let me, while you're thinking and unmuting, let me ask one here. Let's see. What does GCP plan to do to strengthen our metropolitan cores to facilitate a more prosperous economic collaboration in Ohio?
That's a big question. I would say stay tuned. We actually have our annual event next week. We'll be rolling out a little bit more about our strategy. The headline version of it, there's 5 major. So like every business leadership group, every business chamber, our mission is all about accelerating growth and prosperity in our region, right? We want a thriving region for all businesses and individuals. We've got 5 major priority areas that we're going to be focused on. The first is all around dynamic businesses, really driving productivity and innovation and growth oriented businesses, tech oriented businesses. So that'll be a big focus area of our work. Second is around abundant talent, because you can't grow dynamic businesses if you don't have the talent. And that's talent at all skill levels, right? From entry level and all the way to the triple PhDs that we find in life sciences that, you know, we need all of it, and we need it in abundance if we're going to have dynamic businesses. The third is can't have abundant talent if you don't have inclusive opportunity. If we don't have all of our residents interested in and able to participate in the pathways to join these dynamic businesses, we're never going to succeed as a region. And so there'll be a lot of focus on that. The fourth is all around having an appealing community, because once you've actually got, you know, these great businesses and great talent, they can work anywhere, right? And we want to keep them obviously in the Cleveland region, Cleveland Metro. And to do that, you need to have an appealing community. And that's about not only a vibrant downtown, but it's about the amenities that all of us enjoy as individuals, whether it's parks, recreation, sports, arts, culture, restaurants, all that stuff. If we don't have that, we don't compete well as a community. And then the fifth big thing in Cleveland, and this is a Cleveland specific issue. This is not a, you know, this is very distinguished to Cleveland, not a Columbus issue, is we need to have some more confidence. We've got a major issue in Cleveland with the lack of confidence. And it's about really kind of building, in particular, business confidence in our region. We've got incredible entrepreneurs like the Bill Sanfords of the world and the Mal Mixons, who recently passed away, but many, many more. Hiro Fujita at QED, Ray Dalton, who's, you know, on his 7th business, and on and on and on, that have been building businesses in our lifetime, not building businesses that we read about in history books. And in Cleveland, we spend way too much time talking about what happened at the turn of 2 centuries ago, and not enough time recognizing what's happening in our own midst and seeing that success and using those stories to really inspire, you know, the entrepreneurs that are with us today, as well as that next generation. So there's gonna be a big effort on promoting, you know, these success stories so that business leaders start to recognize Cleveland as a place that's been nurturing and growing businesses that are succeeding in our lifetime, not just a century ago when John D. Rockefeller roamed public square.
Wow, thanks, Baiju. You took that big question and and outlined it very well.
Stay tuned for more. More to
That's
come as we
great.
kind of start to unveil the public phase, you know, starting next week and then going into the post-Labor Day phase.
That's great. I see Mike Bruckman jumped on video. Hey, Mike, do you have a question?
I did. Good to see you, Baiju and Jen,
Mike.
everybody, and the BioOhio crew here. Congratulations on the GCP position and role, and looking forward to seeing what you're going to be doing over the next couple of years. Something you touched on as a focus area seemed really interesting and really tangible to me, and that was on the second point on recruiting mid and top level talent to the area.
Yeah.
Are you able to dive any deeper into like what kind of policies or support you might be able to provide to young companies? Because I know with, for example, for our company, small biotech company, the ability to recruit, or the enticement to recruit young or experienced PhDs or experts in the industry is, we can get them here, we just can't pay them, we can't provide the benefits that bigger companies can offer. Everything else is there, but I'm curious what other incentives and what other support GCP might be offering for early stage companies.
So Mike, there's a couple things we've been thinking about, and we'd be open to obviously having more thoughts on this because where we've been focused on talent attraction, which is a component, there's a big part of this that's also talent retention, which is all of the folks that are here already today. On talent attraction, we've been working in partnership with Destination Cleveland, Jobs Ohio, Team Neo, and a bunch of others on putting together a more comprehensive talent attraction initiative. There was a pilot that was launched at the early days of the pandemic. If you go to findyourohio.com, you'll find a pilot that's been run in the IT sector by Jobs Ohio, in which we've kind of been learning a little bit along the way in terms of both campaigns that they've been using, segments they've been targeting outside of Ohio, and then sort of how successful or not in like any other pilot and entrepreneurial industry it's been, and we've been tweaking from there. So we'll be running that type of effort with a focus on STEM degrees, STEM individuals, right? Both the IT, but also broadly life sciences and engineering. And part of that will be out of market. A part of that will be in market. And in market, it's really around retaining the individuals that we have at our graduate and undergraduate programs of interest and getting them connected to employers, in particular through internships and co-ops, so that there's early exposure to career opportunities that might lead to a mutual desire to continue post-graduation. Now, that doesn't address the mid-level one, is more on the attraction side and sort of getting the messaging out to targeted audiences that we know have a Cleveland connection because of either past history in the region and or proximity to the region. That's part of the external attraction, along with sort of targeting specific meetings and conventions and kind of building around that. What we don't have, Mike, that would be really helpful to understand is if there are policy incentives that we should be advocating for startup companies to fill that gap, because we know how competitive the talent market is. We read about it every day, particularly in the IT sector, especially with kind of remote work in the IT sector. And we've got Cleveland employers, not just startup companies, but I hear from the Cleveland Clinic that they're competing with basically Google these days in their IT department. And Google's willing to pay a lot more and let people stay in Cleveland. And that's making it hard for the clinic and other organizations that sides to compete. If there are ideas that anyone has that about what we should be thinking about policy-wise, this is the time to sort of bring it forward to the state level to say, these are ideas that I think our current administration and leadership in the legislature might be really open to say these are targeted incentives around a type of talent that we know is critical for our state's success. We might be able to put something through, much like we do to promote investment.
I know that the Ohio Diversity and Inclusiveness Internship Program has been pretty successful for our company, where they do cover like two-thirds of the salary up to a certain level. And we've taken advantage of that to provide internships to a handful of individuals, as well as internships from Case Western and other area schools. So it's really, really great for that level of interest. I know trying to retain talent, everybody who comes through the program remains excited about their career. And I'm sure, other life sciences companies that may be attending can also echo that. Unlike the IT space, a lot of the employees of local life sciences companies are working in the lab and they have to physically be here, which is good for the economy, the local economy as well.
Yeah, but any ideas that you or others have around, what we collectively, BioOhio, the chambers should be thinking about advocating for how we do that, we're open to those ideas. And, as Mike said, I think we've got friends at senior levels of this administration that would be really interested in continuing to nurture this.
I may make a couple of comments on the hiring. This is Jan, by the way, thank you. We have been going through now hiring of a whole different type of individuals over the last 6 to 8 months. And I don't think it's a difficult issue to hire in at the technologist, masters, and PhD, as long as it's in science. We can find those locally. We can even recruit in from outside state for those positions. What is hard is to find those in bioinformatics, computational biology, especially as the experience needs are increasing up to sort of a senior level. It's extremely hard to find individuals. And if we find them, then the recruitment into Cleveland becomes an issue after that. So first trying to lure people in to get interested, after that to get them to come. It's just, I haven't found a solution to that that's easy, I would say, on that, but that means the programmers are really, really high in demand. And I can understand if the clinic says that it's hard for them because they compete with Google and pay scales is just out of the roof comparatively.
Right.
But it's the direction that many companies have to go.
Yeah.
And so therefore that's a hard one. Another thing that becomes a challenge and has become a challenge is, of course, as you know, on the vertically integrated pharma company that can take a drug the whole way to market. They have a whole sort of operational training set that occurs that you get into when you work for that company. And it's the same anywhere in the world where those are present. I mean, I was spending 9 years initially at Novo Nordisk, so I know how it feels on the inside. Now, the thing is that after now having spent 14 years in Cleveland, and many of those at the Cleveland Clinic, we do not have at all any of those companies around. And that means, to me at least, when I grew up in a society now in Europe, but it's the same thing as if you're around Kendall Square in the Bay Area, San Diego, and so that the trainees, the talent for knowing how to do that is available there, and they all live there. In those cities that are fortunate enough, say for instance for Indianapolis, they have Lilly. So I wondered all the time, and I spoke about this to the Cleveland Clinic leadership, how important I think it would be to see if one could somehow, if the local region could somehow get that type of business attracted. I know that's probably hard as I don't know what, but it could be transformative if one of the biggies could create some form of a facility or research operations or something, manufacturing that would be here. Because it's super, super hard to build that up from the ground, and we can lean towards entrepreneurship for decades, and it may not come through that. So it's just something I want to get back to you guys now that you say that you're always thinking about what you can do. And I think that, say if Amgen wanted to run a shop out of here instead of Austin, that would be fantastic as example and so forth, right? So in other words, what could Ohio do so that we can get on the map, so that instead of Texas becomes the luring place out of the Silicon Valley, and that we can bring the Bostonians here, instead of everybody telling me that, you got to move your company over there because you won't be able to attract the people you need.
So Mike, you can talk about both Amgen as well as Sarepta and some of the great successes that Columbus has recently had.
Yeah, Amgen just announced a $500 million investment in, it's about 3 miles from my house here.
Fantastic.
So
there you go. So you already had I didn't know that. Fantastic.
Yeah, they just
Congratulations to Columbus then.
They just announced it a few weeks ago, and they've already come back and they have plans to expand beyond where they are.
Fantastic.
And then you have Sarepta Therapeutics, who purchased my previous company, MyoNexus Therapeutics, and now has built their global R&D Center for Genetic Medicine here in suburban Columbus, near the Easton facility, next to Abbott and Abbott Nutrition business. And we have one major pharma and 2 well-funded early-stage biotech, largely gene therapy companies, looking at sites around Columbus right now. There's tremendous growth and momentum in this particular vertical. Baiju referenced that I'm leading for Innovate Ohio, a gene and cell therapy sub-work group for the administration. And ironically, talking about Jobs Ohio, so that meeting I referenced earlier this week, the 3 major themes coming out of that were: 1, workforce for the rapidly growing biotech industry here, particularly gene and cell therapy, but throw Amgen on top of it and others. And I just, while we were sitting here, I have the invite to participate in the next Jobs Ohio executive leadership meeting to brief the entire leadership of Jobs Ohio on the needs around workforce development to service this industry. And secondly, so that's all happening. And then on the recruitment and attraction side, certainly the state is engaged. We talked about getting on the plane, to going to Cambridge, to going to San Francisco, to have that outreach. Baiju will I'm sure you will, if assuming that happens, who knows what Delta and what's going on, but the timing of that. But I think it's a thing, we absolutely should be doing that. Director Mahalik of Department of Development, very much engaged around the marketing and BD component of this. We spent a lot of time talking about recruiting anchor tenants into the innovation districts. So they are engaged on this, and we as a community have an opportunity now to shape their thinking and how they're moving forward about it. I will leverage something Baiju said earlier. I think my interpretation is Cleveland may have a lack of confidence per se in the business community. The state of Ohio has had a lack of confidence in the life sciences industry for years. And I think the sea change is now we have enough. There is conviction in the state government that we can compete and grow this business in a material way. Manufacturing services with Cardinal Health and the others out there, but also on the innovation front end and creation of companies as well. So Columbus in particular, but Cleveland has its own. This is where state cooperation would be reinforcing. Because I look at it, I think Baiju and I could probably sit in a room for an hour with some others, and you can pretty quickly from a strategy hat say this seems to be where Cleveland. I have a theory as to where Cleveland is differentiated. Columbus is differentiated. Cincinnati is differentiated. They're different, but synergistic. Mm-hmm. That's a tremendous opportunity for us collectively. And what I'm trying to message to the state of Ohio is we need to be able to do the corporate strategy, but we also need to get to the business unit strategy, if you will, as well.
Yeah, and it's we need to do it, Jan, in Cleveland. You know, we've got some significant assets that we need to be building around. We need to be looking at the corporate side of Cleveland, not just our institutional assets. And I think our corporate side doesn't always get well recognized in terms of what they bring to the table. And so whether that's Steris, Canon, Hitachi, Philips Medical, I mean, there's a lot of reasonably sized corporate operations here that need to be expanded. And that's like, to your point of, you know, how do we create some of these pads of training and talent aggregation? We need to put a lot more focus around those organizations while we're still nurturing the innovation ecosystem and the research work. So Jen, I've got time for maybe one more question, and then I've got to unfortunately go into my next.
I know this has been a fascinating.
You guys have got to get to networking as well.
Right. Well, yeah. And I know we're short on time. We do have 2 raised hands, and guys, if you can make it really quick, Sue and Bob. Sue, I'm going to go with you first with your question. Maybe we can squeeze in 2 more questions and then call it a day.
Thank you very much. I'm Sue He. I'm the Greater Cleveland Chinese Chamber of Commerce. Talking as an international chamber, that we want to build this relationship with local chamber or companies, because we have this delegation mission and we want to introduce Cleveland, Ohio to China. And my question is, after COVID-19, if some delegation come, where should we bring them to? Like, how to collaborate with GCP, with our international chamber mission together? What's the best way to collaborate together?
Yeah, so Sue, in my experience, so I've been over to China a few times to explore collaborations. This now dates me probably about 10, 15 years ago now, for opportunities to kind of connect Ohio and China in the life sciences. I think, you know, my advice would be, I know that there are research and clinical collaborations that already exist between Cleveland and Cleveland organizations and organizations in China. I think that there are likely many corporate supply chain relationships that probably also exist. Mapping that as a starting point to identify what those opportunities are that we can build around would be my advice. To identify the people that are going to be naturally interested in expanding their existing activity. And then that might lead to either a thematic focus around a segment of our industry, or potentially a geographic focus, but I'm going to guess it's going to be more thematic than geographic as it relates to China.
Great, thank you, Baiju. And then we have Bob Schmidt, longtime Cleveland entrepreneur on the phone. He wants to ask a quick question, then we'll let you go.
Well, Baiju, congratulations, first of all, on your new job. It's just great. And secondly, I just wanted to thank you so much for everything you've done for us for the last several decades, because I want to be able to point out what it was like before you were here. During the 90s, you were talking about, oh, well, you can always go back to industry. Well, the attitude in Cleveland during the 90s was not only is this guy who's calling himself an entrepreneur unemployed, he's unemployable. You can never hire them because they just don't have the attitude to be able to work in industry. So that was for a decade. And that really changed in that 2000 to 2002 timeframe.
Yeah.
And I credit you and Ray Leach and others that, made the big change. So thank you very much for that. The main thing I wanted to talk about on this was the hiring in Cleveland, hire here, stay here kind of approach. And there's two parts that I see to that. Is one, the Biden administration is currently talking about getting rid of non-compete agreements. And this is very dangerous for anybody that's got any kind of trade secrets or, is investing in technology. We won't survive because I've already lost several people to California, to big tech. And, that was before they could stay here. So it's going to get worse now. So they moved to California and took the hit in living cost. But to be able to not have non-competes will make things much worse. So number one, please talk to the Biden administration and make sure they understand the importance to entrepreneurs. And the second part of that is in Columbus of how do you put together a grant program for the hire here, stay here kind of thing, where you get a bonus if you're an intern, but that means you've got to, there's handcuffs to it, that you've got to stick around with that Cleveland-based company. And so I would encourage you to think about that, and I'd be happy to talk about it more, but I think those are two things that are very important for keeping employees in entrepreneurial companies.
It's a good idea, Bob. And again, I encourage everyone to keep thinking about these creative policy ideas. I've heard thoughts around this that both relate to not only internship support, as Mike was talking about, but also is there something we can do around student debt, knowing that, how much of a burden that is for recent graduates, to tie it into sort of something that, we as a state pick up over time, a portion of, if people stay in the state and, effectively help give some time to establish some roots around here and things of that sort. So creative ideas, send them to Jen and the team. I think with BioOhio, with the chambers, we're all trying to figure out how we give Ohio and Ohio companies a competitive advantage as it relates to talent. But with that, Jen, I've got to run. Really appreciate, Mike, thank you for moderating our dialogue today. It's always a pleasure to be on a panel with you. And I'm a huge fan of BioOhio. I'm looking forward to the vision as it's being refreshed with Eddie's hiring, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with everyone in the industry and with BioOhio to keep growing our sector for years to come here.
Perfect conclusion, Baiju. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. You all enjoy your evening. Let's be in touch.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Baiju.
Thanks, guys.
Be well.
Bye.